Okay, everybody, welcome to this June edition of the North Central Climate Collaborative webinar. We do want to let you know that this is being recorded. Also want to let you know that you do not have the ability to unmute yourself because this is a larger webinar. So if you do have any questions at all, please enter those into the chat and we will monitor those and take questions as Heidi decides that she'd like to answer them. We do have with us today Heidi Roop with the University of Minnesota. I see from the title slide that it does have ties to your new book that was out as of a couple of months ago, of which I have picked up a copy and started in on it. Have to admit I haven't finished it, but I'll get there. And with that, I think that's the logistics. Heidi, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Hans. Yes, and just as a context for the book, you don't have to sit down and read one fell swoop. That's the whole point. You can start in the beginning, middle, or end, but I appreciate your support very much. And thank you so much to everyone who's tuning in today. Appreciate your time and energy and expertise. I know there's a lot to capture our attention, and I know it's summertime, so I really appreciate you all joining us today for this conversation around climate impacts to action and how we might think about both starting or sustaining our own climate solutions journeys. And I think importantly, how to engage audiences and community members and our own family members in helping them see a role they might play in advancing solutions to the climate crisis. My name is Heidi Roop. I'm an assistant professor of climate science and an extension specialist at the University of Minnesota. And as part of my role, I lead a program called the Climate Adaptation Partnership, which I'll talk to you briefly about just to sort of set the stage for my remarks. And then I'll talk to you about this project, which was this book, and also how that's informing some extension programming that we are creating here at the University of Minnesota. So I lead a group that's really focused on bringing all the best of extension out into the landscape and really thinking about how we support communities in understanding and managing their climate risks. And we have a vision for supporting thriving communities and landscapes, and we do that through collaboration, capacity building, and advancing climate-informed decision-making. Our group is really focused on climate risk management and thinking about both mitigation and adaptation, or prevention and preparation, as two essential ingredients as we think about how we develop a comprehensive, robust, and necessary portfolio of work in the context of climate solutions. So we know very clearly that the science says we both have to prevent the problem of climate change from getting worse. We do that through activities that mitigate things like greenhouse gases, as we also need to make investments in preparing for the changes that we know we've already set in motion. And so effective climate risk reduction and management requires investments and actions that address both mitigation and adaptation. There are, of course, a few really lovely things that sort of sit in this overlapping Venn diagram that have co-benefits. You might be doing something like investing in soil health because it improves water quality and reduces runoff, but it also brings benefits: healthy soils, sequester carbon. And so that is a climate solution that is overlapping in that it both helps prepare but also prevent climate change from getting worse. Just briefly, our work, we really focus in the context of the sort of preparation side of the coin. We're really fortunate in Minnesota to have really robust extension programming focused on mitigation, the mitigation side of things. We have a program called CERTS that focuses a lot on energy efficiency and transitioning to renewable energies. So we sort of sit as a complement, really focused on the preparation piece, but also on trying to better understand our actual climate risks that we face as a state and where we face those and what those look uniquely like in different communities and different sectors. So as part of that, we blend a really robust set of research and extension programming together. We develop high resolution climate projections on our team. This is helping us to better characterize the impacts of future climate on things like extreme precipitation, heat, soil temperature, lake temperature, evapotranspiration, that then help us better understand how those impacts will manifest on the landscape. And we are starting to work on sort of a chain of models where we actually integrate that information into other types of models like agricultural models and hydrologic models that really help turn those data into information about impacts. We also develop adaptation indicators and metrics, so really trying to understand how different activities and investments translate into resilience or preparedness on the landscape. This is a new and developing field of work. There are some frameworks, but we've been working with the state of Minnesota to think about what are a set of metrics and indicators we can be using to track our progress. We do a range of dedicated extension programming. We contribute to the development of new climate records, even in places as far away as Antarctica, which serves as a critical place for understanding principal information about Earth's climate system. We engage in a lot of training and work on developing leading practices in the field of adaptation across different business lines and sectors. We work a lot in the water utility and water management sector on thinking about equity and adaptation. And we do a range of state and federal engagement, acknowledging that from science to action also includes policy and informed elected officials who can be thinking critically about what these solutions look like in the context of both federal and state and county and municipal level decision making. We are fortunately in a position in Minnesota. This is news relatively hot off the presses at the conclusion of the most recent legislative session in the state of Minnesota. We were actually able to secure an appropriation to expand a dedicated climate resilience extension program across the state. We're currently working to configure exactly what positions. I do have a slide at the end. We are hiring. So if you are looking for an extension career focused on climate resilience across different sectors, from human health to agriculture to water resource management, please do take a look and reach out. We are going to be fortunately hiring a range of research and extension positions and placing them across the state of Minnesota and partnering them with a range of other programs working to develop and seek resilience on the landscape and help communities really plan for the changes that we know that we've set in motion. So please reach out if that's of interest, and I'll share a link with you in a minute. But I also, we think a lot about communication. It's one of the things that I am most passionate about in my career, and my extension programming is really doing a lot of listening, having a lot of conversations around climate. And I, unfortunately and fortunately, come from a classic basic science training. This is me digging a pit, an ice. Actually, we use chainsaws to carve ice in Antarctica. It's sort of bizarre. I never thought I'd do that, but you have to undergo chainsaw training in Antarctica. We never would have thought, place with no trees. There is a chainsaw certification program you have to go in order to drill these pits. I'm standing in ice that is about 50,000 years old. And we are digging down to get some clean sample, but spend a lot of time in my career collecting ice cores and other archives of climate and environmental change. And also spent a lot of time thinking about how to communicate that information. And in this process, for as more years than I care to admit at this point, was really good at presenting the information, the facts and the figures, the things that we principally know don't really change hearts and minds in their entirety, and would paint this picture, and can still do this. I'm trying to improve my practice of communication around the issue, but would get to the end of every talk or conversation and hands would fly up. And it would be the same question, one that I'm sure you ask speakers, that maybe you ask of yourself. I know it was something that I was asking of myself quite often, which was, what can I do? What are the ways that I can influence the change I want to see to make this issue more salient and more urgent to people with authority to make decisions? And importantly, connect more people from different backgrounds to wanting to be part of the solution. And of course, I don't have all the answers, but I think the answer comes in the collective. all of you on this call are an opportunity for impact, and many of you probably already are having an impact and maybe don't know it. But this question would be posed, and I hate to admit that a professional photographer caught this image of me in real life. This is me standing in front of 1,000 people. And yes, I made that embarrassing face. And yes, there is photographic evidence, but I put that up here to both poke fun of myself, but also this is principally how I felt at the end of almost every talk or conversation around climate that was trying to catalyze people towards action. Is the what can I do? And this is how I felt both on the outside and more frequently, I hope, on the inside. I didn't necessarily feel like I had the right answers. I was sort of saying the things that I thought might resonate, but often unintentionally excluding a lot of people from feeling like they could be part of the solution and putting activities out there that didn't necessarily catalyze people towards action or necessarily feel like they had any agency or power to change the collective, right? So as we think about climate action, we of course need to think about individual things, community systems, and the collective, right? We of course have to move, big systems have to change, principally change. And how do we feel part of that? Does what we do even matter? And I didn't feel like I had the answers. So I had to take a step back and think about what could I do? How could I walk the walk? And I didn't necessarily feel like I had enough information to guide my own journey, right? I clearly knew the problem. I've got a front row seat to the challenges, to how they're emerging on the landscape, right? There are many people who have that front row seat, but I get to sit and stew in climate data, which I enjoy, but really felt like I was missing a huge piece of being part of the solution, which was showing up as myself and understanding how I could put myself on this journey and also welcome others in. So I had to think about who am I? What am I good at? What are my passions? What are the things that I care about? And importantly, what is the future that I want to help create? And some of that has nothing to do with climate, or, well, climate is everywhere. But I think the point being, I needed to sit and understand what is the future that I want to create, and then understand how do I get there? How do I help get us there? How do I as an individual help realize that future? How do I work in my community to make sure we can realize a shared vision for our future? And then what do we need to do to push those systems to help us so that we have a fighting chance of creating that vision that we want to create in the future? And so I needed to show up more as myself when I thought about what are the answers? What is it that I can do? And of course, there is no single answer. There's no one answer that's the best. And so this led me on the journey to create the Climate Action Handbook, which I'm going to outline for you a bit today. This book, it's still very awkward to talk about, still sort of in doubt that this even happened, never thought I would write a book, had zero interest in writing a book. But I was actually held to task because in an audience, I said something like, well, every action matters. And someone who happened to be a publisher came up to me afterwards and said, okay, I think I agree, but you need to put more meat on that bone. And I wasn't in a position to do it. And so what did I do? I sort of leaned into the things that I do know. Whether this is the right answer, I don't know. I think it's part of a portfolio of answers to thinking about how do we engage more people in climate solutions. And that was, I need to understand what are the things that we can do. How do we start to think about this? And they said back to me, well, come up with 100 things and we'll talk. And I thought, well, there aren't 100 things. That can't possibly be true. There are not 100 things we can do. Well, it turns out there were more than 100, and I couldn't include everything that I wanted to in the Climate Action Handbook. This book is, as you can see, these are examples of the visuals. It's structured in a way that really is meant to be easy to digest. It's supposed to be a welcome mat. Come learn something new you didn't know before, be inspired by a visual or by a quote. Maybe be challenged to think about your practice, engaging in climate solutions, or maybe things that you didn't think were connected to climate, how there might be a climate filter on things like your insurance policy and whether you carry the right riders for the climate impacts that you're likely to live through both today and in the future. So what did I do? I started thinking about all the things in our everyday lives and beyond that we could be, where there might be opportunities to engage in solutions and engage in learning. A lot of these things, it's about 300 words paired with those visuals. So it's not a lot. Again, it's sort of meant to be a teaser, provide some food for thought and an invitation to do or think more deeply and to act. So started to think about the very real context in which climate action occurs. It's a partisan subject, that there's a lot of dis and misinformation, that there are corporate greenwashing rampant, that can convince us to think in different ways that maybe aren't as effective towards moving towards solutions. So really thinking about how do we avoid things like single action bias, which are chronic in the climate solution space. We think we do one thing and it's a done, right? We've done enough, we've done our part. How do we inspire people to connect and see more ways they might participate in being part of the solution? Thinking about our energy transportation, travel and work, the food we eat, the choices we make for shopping, what we do around the home, how we garden, where we engage in recreation, green spaces, the role of the natural environment around us and how we can be a catalyst to protect that environment and also build it for a resilient tomorrow. Thinking about our health and well-being and what's at risk, ways we engage civically and in community to both mitigate and adapt to climate change. And then, of course, the critical role that both education and information play in continuing our climate solutions journey. So as I thought about the book and these actions, and this is sort of broadly true, and I sort of teed this up already in sort of the context in which we think about our work at the Climate Adaptation Partnership, which is that there are sort of these two critical ingredients and portfolios of action that we can build around climate solutions. The first is, how can we prevent climate change from getting worse? These are, again, the mitigation things. I put the yellow one in here. This is thinking about how we drive. As someone who does have a slight amount of good Midwestern passive aggressive road rage, I'll just say that. I'm from Wisconsin, so I've got some of that Midwest on lockdown here, but I put this in here because there's a personal story. Of course, my parents have perhaps begrudgingly looked at this book. I mean, of course, they support me, but I'm asking them to learn and behave differently. And my dad's favorite action, he's so proud of himself. When he learned about things like road rage and driving the speed limit as being able to save you both gas money and emissions. Of course, my dad wrote me a very lengthy email about how proud he was that he lives in Wisconsin still. I live in the Twin Cities, and they visited, and he learned this little statistic about driving the speed limit, and he did the math on the way here and on the way home, and he was so pleased with how much money he saved, and now he drives the speed limit. So if you see a white Subaru somewhere between the Twin Cities and Wisconsin, and they're driving the speed limit and possibly below it, that's probably my dad, and he has some quip. He's going to get some bumper stickers. It's like, I'm driving the speed limit, are you? Something about his climate heroism, So anyway, there are lots of fun personal things that emerge here, but we need to think broadly, both small things like perhaps driving the speed limit, but also big system things about understanding where our energy comes from and how we might opt into more renewable energy where we live and where we work. So there's lots of different ways as we think about our climate solutions journey to think about the opportunities to prevent climate change from getting worse by engaging in actions that mitigate greenhouse gases. And then really rich opportunities for thinking about how we prepare for climate change. This is one of my, again, this is something that I get to do in my professional life. So I think a lot about preparation, adaptation, but it was really fun and fulfilling to think about the many ways that things that we do can help us prepare for climate change and ways that it allows us to celebrate community leadership. I suspect you don't have to look too far to find a community climate leader near you. You yourself are likely a climate leader. And so I had a lot of fun thinking about and identifying and learning about people who are leading climate action and preparation in their community, thinking about the role of faith and our personal identities and how we show up in community as being really essential ingredients in what it means to be and have a prepared community, investing in social connection, thinking about the multiple facets of what a strong and healthy community can mean in the context of being prepared for and resilient to the impacts of climate change. A personal one for me, I was motivated by a lot of things I learned. Again, this was really a personal journey for my own climate solutions journey. But I got to think a lot about, am I ready to weather the storm? And can I do something that I value deeply, which is show up for my neighbors and be in community in my neighborhood? And upon reflection, the answer was no, because I myself was not prepared to weather some of the impacts that I am likely to be exposed to where I live. And so invested in developing a stay bin and a go bag, and have thought about how I'm going to be able to show up for my community in the moment that we might be navigating some weather or climate related disaster. And this is a context, it's hard for me to have you all raise your hands, but I typically ask a room of people, how many people have an emergency kit at home, a stay bin or a go bag. And you would be surprised how few people have thought about their individual preparedness, having some water, an emergency kit, some form of communication. Increasingly, there's access to backup battery systems that we can have on backup for charging critical medical equipment, or making sure we have access to powering our phones, or can help our neighbors in the moment of crisis if they don't have power. So really thinking about our climate solutions journey and that portfolio of work, having a multitude of benefits, some personal, and again, some on the collective. And also then on the collective scale, thinking about things like green infrastructure and what does it mean to help a community think about rain gardens and green roofs and cool roofs, and learning from other programs from other parts of the country and around the world that have implemented solutions at a community scale that are bringing real benefit in the context of enhancing and building resilience. So as we think about our climate solutions journey, I invite you to think not just about the things we typically think about, those mitigation activities. Maybe you really, like me, really love the preparation piece and you're really prepared, but thinking about how we create, instead of a carbon footprint, think about our climate action footprint. What are the ways in which we're contributing both to prevention and the preparation? And sometimes when it's difficult to have a climate conversation, the preparation can be a more open door than talking to someone about something that might be mitigation related. So there's lots of opportunity to think about our individual climate action footprints and how we might go about inviting others into the conversation and crafting their own. So at this point, I usually get a lot of questions that say, well, what's the one thing I should do? It's the same question, right? What should I do? What are the top 3 things that everyone should do? And my answer to that is that the top 3 answers, the top 5 answers, the top 10 answers, it depends on who you are and what motivates you and what your strengths and passions are and the context of your today and the future you're working toward for tomorrow. And so again, the book is just a sampling of things that we can do, meant to be put together in the combination that works for you today and invites you back tomorrow to think about how you can continue to craft this journey. So these are the 5 things. If asked to give 5 things, and I'm going to sort of cheat, you're going to catch on here. I'm not going to give you all the answers because only you have the answers of what's going to work best for you and your context and your community and your individual life and the things that you value and care about. But here's a framework to start thinking about it. So first, we need to center our actions in our strengths and passions, right? And this is really part of the journey for me, was I had to really think about what are my strengths and passions? What can I offer to this space besides a bunch of data about past climate, right? Really important to some. It's really been foundational to our understanding of the Earth's climate system. But for me, it wasn't enough. So what are the other things what are my other strengths and assets? What are the things that are going to continue to bring me and my family along on this journey and have me motivate to connect into community? And think about taking some risks and being vulnerable and engaging in spaces where maybe I'm not very comfortable, or having conversations that might be really difficult, or quite frankly, listening more in new and different ways to new and different people to really understand how we move more collectively towards solution. We need to use our energy wisely. And I mean this in two different and distinct ways. We need to commit to communicate, and that's each and every one of us. We need to look to the ballot box and then beyond it. And we have to consider the individual, the community, and the collective. So what do I mean? So leaning into our strengths and passions. Climate change, we hear this all the time. If you listen to climate news or podcasts or talks like these, right? Climate change is an all hands on deck situation. And when I say that, what I really mean is what we shape and create together needs to include a rich diversity of perspectives and approaches. We need the things that you are good at. I guarantee it. We need you. We need the things that you get you out of bed in the morning. We don't need you to become something you're not. We don't need you to put the things that, like, maybe you're really creative and you are passionate about arts or crafts or your faith group, whatever those things are that you, where you connect in community that fill your cup. We need you to do that and then layer a climate lens on it, or find ways to connect in those spaces that bring in opportunity to do shared learning and move towards action. So we have to lean into the things that we're good at, the spaces where we feel at our greatest, where we feel fulfilled, and where we feel like maybe we have an opportunity for impact, because that can then spiral out into more spaces and domains and ensures that we can keep doing this work for the long haul. So this is a quote that one of my mentors and my former boss said on the eve of her retirement. And I don't think it could be truer. And so why make up something when it's said so beautifully? And so this is from Dr. Amy Snover, who said in an interview when she was retiring, "No matter what you do or what your skills are, you can have a role in shaping that future and thinking about how we prepare for and reduce climate change." And that future that she's talking about is that future that you are an expert in. You are an expert in the future that you want to create. And climate change is going to be part of that future. And so we all need to bring our strengths and passions and skills, whatever those are, to being part of the solution. So that's one. Two, we need to use our energy wisely. There's no question that we need to transition away from fossil fuels where we can. There are certainly harder to decarbonize sectors, and they are coming along, but where we can, we need to opt into energy efficiency and renewable energy. This can take place at home. This can take place in the workplace. You could be a catalyst for that conversation. But some of it is going into understanding where are there opportunities to opt in, again, to that energy efficiency and weatherization. There are more and more incentives, at least in the United States, to improve weatherization and to make it easier to transition to renewable energy and systems that enhance our energy efficiency. And so we need to be thinking about how we use this form of energy wisely. We also have to use this energy wisely. And I can see the chat. I'm terrible at multitasking, so I apologize. I've successfully managed to open the chat. You'd think after this many years of virtual meetings, I would have this on lockdown. But I would like anyone who is comfortable and able to add into the meeting chat. And Sadie, I see you're on this call. You can't cheat because I know you know the answer. Sadie Newman, if you know what these three circles represent, any guesses? They're related to proportion of size, the size of three things. Any guesses are very welcome. I'll just take a pause here for about 20 or 30 seconds. Sun, moon, earth. Thank you, James. Solar, geothermal, and tidal. Awesome. Thanks, Garrett. Any other guesses? Climate change audiences. Ray Wolf, you win the prize. Thank you, Bridget, for those. Yep, reduce, reuse, recycle. So these dots represent the number of Americans who are concerned and cautious and alarmed about climate change. And on the far little smaller blue dot, those who are dismissive or deny that climate change is real or global warming is real. I can't tell you how many conversations, and I'm sure you've had the same, where we think about and talk about almost exclusively how to change the minds or convince the tiny blue dot or the people in the middle who, quite frankly, are honestly just looking for a safe place to have a conversation and get some information from someone they trust. That's probably you, right? One of us. They're looking for a place to have that conversation and connect in a non-confrontational and authentic way. But more often than not, we are avoiding the sun, the big, bright yellow, come talk with me. I am concerned and I am cautious, but I don't quite know yet what to do. I don't really know who to trust, but I'm interested enough and I care, but I need to be connected to catalyze action. I invite you to thinking about your energy in this space, because it's not that we can all, for every conversation we have, make it about climate change. I don't encourage you to do that, right? There are ways to elegantly weave climate into the things and the conversations that we have on a daily basis. But more often than not, we're trying to change someone or convince someone of something. And we don't have time for that. We need to engage the over 70% of Americans who want to understand what to do and want to be part of the solution. That's where we can have impact. So I invite you to think about when we all have many demands on our time and our energy, that we think about how we use our energy to connect and communicate wisely as well. And I just want to paint this picture for you with some information that we collected in the state of Minnesota using polling similar to that of the Yale Center for Climate Communication. Last August, we distributed a poll across the state. We had over 1,000 respondents and learned, unsurprisingly, that Minnesotans are concerned about climate change. 76% of Minnesotans reported being concerned about climate change. And 64%, and there's a lot of information we learned, but I found it really heartening. And of course, we need to move these numbers, but 64% of Minnesotans want to see us do more to prepare for climate change by preserving our green spaces, our grasslands, our forests, and our wetlands. 83% of Minnesotans think local, state, and municipal governments are responsible for addressing climate change. Over 80% said they thought the federal government was responsible. Over 80% said they thought the private sector was responsible. And 81% thought individuals should be doing more to address climate change. And what's in there is that so many of us want to see all of the different facets of leadership and decision-making authority do more to address the challenges and deploy solutions, many of which are already in hand. So there's a bunch of us that are concerned, a majority of us, and there are a majority of us that are looking at all scales of governance and leadership to make that change. And so we need to think about, how do we connect people to the action, to that action piece? We know there's a problem. Now, what do we do? So we have to commit to communicate. And I think this is information that many of you have seen probably time and again. This is from the Yale Center for Climate Change Communication that shows slightly different numbers. On the national scale, 72% of Americans agree that global warming is happening. Yet only 35% of us discuss global warming at least on occasion. And only 33% of Americans, adult Americans, report hearing about global warming in the media at least once a week. So we have an issue, we want to see something get done, but we aren't talking about it. And we also aren't hearing about it in many of the places where we get information. We know that newspapers tend to be one of the places that we go for trusted climate information. We've done some formal media analysis on my team, and there is so much opportunity to deepen the breadth, the frequency, the type, and the type of coverage that we have in our national discourse around climate change. We also need to start telling climate stories that connect to people. A minority of us think that global warming will harm us personally, despite the fact that many of us across the country, for example, we're choking on polluted air, in part because of wildfires, and in the case of many states in the Midwest, because of ozone, things that we expect will worsen under a climate changed in a climate changed future. So look to the ballot box. So this is probably one of the things that surprised me most. I think I inherently understood this, but never really thought about it deeply, which is thinking about, where are elected leaders in our country? Where are climate decisions made? And I think more often than not, this is also about using our energy wisely. We focus on the 0.1% of elected leaders who work at the federal level. They certainly have power, they move a lot of money, but a lot of that money comes to states. 3.6% of elected officials in the United States work at the state level, and 96.3% of elected officials work at the local level. That means we have over 500,000 opportunities for thinking about climate change decision-making where it is rarely occurring right now. There are climate-related decisions happening on a daily basis, often without necessary climate conversation or someone asking, how has climate change played, how have you factored in future climate risks into how you're sizing that culvert, or to the trees that you're planting in this park, or that you're replacing on this boulevard because you just put in new gutter system, or the fact that instead of replacing part of this roadway, you're just filling with asphalt, thereby reducing the distance between the curb and the concrete and the street. So there's less water, and like a place like Minnesota, we're expecting and already experiencing more extreme events. As we work to patch roads, we're actually creating another water problem, which is where roads are often designed to actually be one of the mechanisms for stormwater management. But as you fill it with asphalt, as you repair it, you actually limit the carrying capacity of those roads, exacerbating a problem that we know is going to get worse in the future. And how is that being factored into a lot of cost benefit analyses? It isn't right now. In many places, it's not. And that's a place where if we find opportunity, we can actually think about not only how do we put elected leaders in place or ask those questions, no matter their party affiliation, but also think about engaging with elected leaders. So while 70% of registered voters in the United States want to see the economy transition from fossil fuels to clean energy by mid-century, 90% of registered voters in the US have not contacted their elected leaders to act on climate. So there's, again, a disconnect between wanting to see something happen and engaging where we can catalyze that action. And so this is another opportunity. Look to the ballot box and then beyond. And this is a place where I've been challenging myself to engage more. It's deeply uncomfortable. I had no idea how to engage an elected leader, much less one at a local level. Who are my local leaders is a great place. That's a great question to ask if you don't know. You can find that information out on any state website. You'll be able to find out those sort of levels of government and who represents you. And they want to hear from you. And I learned, again, this is probably, you might be shocked. Many of you probably know this, but I didn't, that engaging an elected leader doesn't have to be super burdensome or time consuming. Yes, there's lots of foreign emails that go around. I personally was really reticent to sign a lot of those because I didn't quite know and I wasn't really engaged in the issue. You certainly need to start understanding, of course, where decisions are being made and maybe what you're for or against if you have a time to engage in thinking about legislation that's maybe passing at the state level or some decisions that are happening at a board meeting, and your county commissioners are making some decisions. But it can be as simple as an email, and your elected leaders want to hear from you. So find your elected leader. It can be a simple email that says, I really would like to encourage you to consider climate risks in X decision, or please act on climate. They note all of those emails. They go into a system and they actually track when a bill or some sort of decision has lots of for or against. And that information, even if you don't hear directly back from a staffer or the leader themselves, your concern, your engagement is noted. It does count. It does matter. So we need to look to the ballot box beyond. And 5, this is the 5th thing. We need to consider action at a range of scales. I don't want you to think that I'm a proponent for only individual action at the expense of ignoring systems. We have to think about the ways that we show up as individuals, the way we contribute in our community, say, understanding whether there's a climate plan in place and how we might support climate leaders, how we engage in making our communities resilient to climate change. That's a great place to connect and engage and do all sorts of things that can enrich in your life beyond just feeling like you've been doing a lot for climate action. And then, of course, we need to think about the systems that we're influencing. And I think individuals are part of the system. And so we have a critical role. And I think there's an important reminder as we hear so much news around climate action and big government level investments and global action on climate change. We need so much of that. We need all of it, but we also need to be thoughtful and intentional about how our impacts and our decisions impact In some cases, communities downstream, or whether we're actually solving a problem or pushing a problem to someone else, somewhere else. There's lots of conversations right now around carbon sequestration and trees, and where forest gets planted, who doesn't get to remove a tree, who gets to have the carbon offset, who's offsetting the carbon, and at the expense of what. So there's lots of deep research going into understanding that while we say work to tackle climate change through carbon sequestration, that we're not exacerbating hunger in parts of the world, or creating further inequities that we know exist in the system. So we need to be thinking about collective action and also the impacts of those actions. Again, ripples effects in good ways, and the ripple effects that maybe are unintended that might be negative in their consequences. A colleague of mine likes to say, when she talks about the difference between sustainability and climate change, there can be a lot of unsustainable solutions to climate change. And so we need to be really thoughtful and intentional about this work and how we show up, and understanding our connection and our impact. So just to sort of bring this back full circle to how we're thinking about this in the work context at the Climate Adaptation Partnership, is that we're thinking about how do we build a community climate leaders program to help people learn and share with one another about how to develop and build these climate solutions journeys, to deepen our understanding, to understand what's going on the landscape, and to celebrate all that is happening. Because I think more often than not, we don't really know all of the good stuff that's going on, because we hear so much about how much more is needed and all of the doom and gloom. And so as we do this work, as we think about how to start our climate solutions journey, or how to sustain our climate solutions journey, I invite you to be mindful of both your head and your heart. This work can be really hard. As I said, it's work that's ongoing and long-term, and our abilities to engage depend on, yes, finding our strengths and passions, but also being really honest with ourselves about how this work is hard. It may be harder on some days. I know I have days that are easier or hard, and certainly days where I just want to give up and I think there's no hope. And then days that are full of an abundance of hope and optimism for the future. And I really hope on the whole that I land more on the optimism, but there is a lot at stake. And it does feel like and some days we are not moving fast enough, far enough, with enough people to make a difference. And so as we do this, we really have to be mindful of what it takes and the personal toll that this work can take. And so I just invite you to be mindful of those aspects of the realities of doing this work, and to find ways to support those around you as well. And with that, I am going to conclude with my final and probably favorite action in the book. And this is, I pull this not from my own, but from my teachings of my grandmother. And it turns out clinical psychology and other evidence support this as being a really important facet of our work moving forward, which is we need to celebrate success and extend gratitude. We know that people who are recipients of acts of gratitude for things that they've done are more likely to perform the act for which they've been acknowledged again. And if there's anything we need, it's more of us doing whatever we can in the ways that we can to make a difference, to continue on this climate solutions journey. And so I invite you to find someone to whom you can send a text or an email, or vocalize your gratitude, or send them a letter, or write an elected leader. Extend some form of gratitude to someone who's done something that you feel is important in your life, or in your world, in your landscape, in your community, to help make it a better place to live, and one that we know will thrive in a changing climate. So I'm going to stop there, and I actually would like to, although people can't unmute, I will just invite you as we go to questions. I would invite you, if you're comfortable, if anyone would like to share a note of gratitude or make a shout out for a colleague or someone in their community. They might not see this, but I invite you to extend some gratitude or celebrate success or your own in the chat box, and we will celebrate you as well. So I'm just inviting you to send some gratitude out into to someone on this call or not. And I guess I will say, I'm going to cheat. I'm gonna go first, and I have the mic. So I guess I'm gonna pull authority here. Just Hans, you're gonna mute me now that I said that. But I would like to thank many of my colleagues who I see join me today. And of course, Sadie, always so nice to see you, and for your continued support and engagement. It really means the world. So I want to thank folks from the University of Minnesota Extension who I saw tune in today. It means a lot to have your support. So thank you.
Well, I want to thank you, Heidi. That was a great presentation. We had a couple questions come in through the chat. The first one is, are you engaged with the University of Minnesota Center for Climate Literacy? Or what can you share about that initiative?
Yes, I am not involved in that initiative. I know they've recently collated a bunch of information and things, but I am not, thank you for the question, Anne. I'm not well connected into that group. I know there's a lot of things happening in this space. I am more connected into sort of other youth related climate activities. It hasn't been a focus of our recent endeavors. Some of the ways that I've been connected into that is actually been helping with a group out of Colorado develop a national climate change curriculum, primarily for middle schoolers and high schoolers. But so thinking about some of those things and building interactive tools, but there's lots of opportunity and there are lots of amazing things working in that space. And I know Hans can give a shout out too. There are folks that have developed a climate curriculum for 4-H. So if you're in extension, there's a national curriculum that can be right-sized to your local context. So there are lots of opportunities and lots of need. So yes, thank you for that question.
All right, the next one. Oh, I do have a poll open. It's only 2 questions. Please take a moment and fill that out for me. James has asked in the chat that he would like someone to rank climate change actions. What are the big ones? What are less important? How do you feel about kind of ranking system?
Yeah, that's great. I think it would depend on what you're ranking. I think that's one of the challenges. So there are groups like Project Drawdown that have ranked activities based on emissions. So emissions reduction and emissions avoided. So if you're looking for one that's looking at big scaling and some smaller local solutions, I really encourage you to check out Project Drawdown. I leaned on that heavily for the book. I think one of the challenges with a ranking is, again, sort of what are you ranking? When it comes to resilience, there's lots of things that can make it easier or harder to rank it. And what matters in a specific context can be wildly different. So if you're specifically interested in emissions, Project Drawdown is a great one. There are some papers and there is an action in the book that has ranked individual actions and emissions by order from 1 to 10. So you can check that out. But there are some ranking systems. I avoided defining what impact meant in this book, acknowledging that there are a diversity of contexts in which climate work happens and how we define impact.
All right,
Hans.
next. Say what?
Yeah. Next
Okay.
question. You're in charge.
Next one we got. How do we overcome the negative effect of alarmists who continually overstate the problem and those people who make failed predictions of doom that may lose many people?
Yes, I think being more effective listeners and more effective, consistent, and persistent communicators. There is a overwhelming din of mis and disinformation around the topic and a continued desire to disconnect from the issue or to claim that it's overblown. I think this is where where we show up as individuals, where we move people towards action rather than thinking about all of the negative doom and gloom. When we look at national polling, there are very clear examples where people's concerns about the issue have been increased by observing personally the direct or impact of an extreme weather event on a family member. So either living it directly, again, this is unsurprising to people who study these things, right? What changed people's mindsets and concerns, level of concern about an issue, experiencing something directly, or having a family member or friend experience a negative impact. So entering in with those types of personal connections. And I think one of our most underutilized effective communication tools is listening. And that may seem sort of ridiculous, but I find often I am myself in situations where I'm talking with people who dismiss the issue. They don't like me because of what I represent. They make a lot of assumptions about me. But I have to do one part of my practice of communication is actually, I call listening through the rant. I do this with friends because it helps me. More often than not, the people who are ranting or claiming that it's overblown, there is a shared value or something underlying that communication. So if you are in an opportunity to have a conversation engaged, sometimes it's not worth it and you have to make a judgment call. And again, this is part of the practice of being a reflexive science communicator. But more often than not, there is a shared value. There's a shared touch point. And I usually try to diffuse the situation and lean into those things that we care about rather than the things that we disagree about. And again, sometimes that's easier said than done. We are operating in an information environment that's deeply complicated for issues that are both polarizing and partisan, like climate change. But more and more people are living the issue and they want to understand how to do something about it. And I think really importantly, and I didn't emphasize this, as we encourage or think about how to communicate about climate action, the primary reason someone does something or changes a behavior doesn't always have to be climate change. And I think that's really important. I think that's something we tend to not think about enough and not honor enough as counting. But like, for example, again, like I said, I'm from Wisconsin, I play into a classic trope. Like I love to clip coupons. I love to save money. I love to tell you how much money I saved on something, right? If I find a quarter in the dryer, it makes my day, right? And then I'm going to squirrel it away for something else. But like that is a value that I hold deeply. It's something about my identity. It's something that I've been raised with in the culture that I'm in. And so sometimes for me, the reason that I am doing something, climate is a benefit and I like count it as a win, but the real reason that I'm doing it, the real reason I'm making that decision is like climate is in there. It's on the like pro con list, but I'm doing it because it makes good financial sense or because it's good for the health and well-being of my child. And also it happens to be good for climate, right? And so I think making sure that we welcome people in that way and like make those things as being okay, right? And that the order of hierarchy for why we might do something, it might be because it's going to increase your yield, but it also happens to be not only good for your soil health, but also it has benefits for climate, right? And so I think there are ways that we can make the solutions part also feel less extreme to people who aren't necessarily living and breathing climate solutions and the urgency to do something, right? And there are a lot of Americans, again, this audience, I'm particularly contextualizing this in the American sort of mindset, who still like think it's a problem for 10 years from now, not today, because there's a lot of other pressing problems that we are facing right now. And we shouldn't deny that reality, but try to find ways to find opportunity for impact and connection while acknowledging that there are a whole lot of other priorities that people are facing day in, day out.
Excellent. So I want to promote the poll one more time. We'll shut that down here in about a minute. The next question we've got in the chat says, it looked like the book has sections on energy, transportation, and agriculture, 3 of the major emission sectors, but not industry. Did you consider that, or what would you have said about it?
Yep, there is some industry in there. I think then I also talk about bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, some of those things that are happening on the industrial scale. There's some things in there around sort of harder to decarbonize sectors like aviation and cargo shipping, larger modes of transportation, in large part, some of the big corporate influences. A lot of that has related to industry. There's certainly more that could be in there. And so there are things in there and also conversations around sort of broader systems change. But also every chapter needed to find a way to connect into individual agency and action. So some of that emerges through thinking about careers, thinking about the built environment and its impact. That's where things like concrete, which is a big sort of section of emissions as well, come in. So yes, great question and really good point.
Okay, so the chat has been lively again this month. There are many more things than just questions, also some resources that have been shared along the way. Heidi, you did mention at one point that you would post a link to the careers
Oh,
that
yeah.
are
Yep.
coming up.
I will
And
do
while
that.
she's working on that, I want to promote the next webinar, which will be at the end of August. At the current moment, Pat Gannon, the University of Missouri state climatologist, is retired, and his successor has been announced. It will be Zach Leeser. Zach will start his state climatologist position in early August, and we will be having him come on I believe it's August 28th, to describe his work and his vision of the future for Missouri. He is currently at The Ohio State University, so he is and has been in the North Central region for some time. Heidi, is there anything you'd like to mention about the link?
Just that we currently have a position out. Please apply. This is a assistant extension professor, extension educator, focused on climate resilience in the agricultural sector. We will be hiring several more positions across key domains and sectors. So check out climate.umn.edu. And also I put the link in there, the MCAP hiring link, a range of researcher and extension roles forthcoming over the next weeks to couple of months. So if you're interested in this work, we're looking to build a awesome team. So please reach out. And if you have any questions, you can also reach out directly, but please do spread the word or apply yourself. We're looking for a fun, exciting, collaborative group of people to help tackle this grand challenge.
All right. With that, thank you, Heidi, for your time today. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you all for attending. Appreciate you filling out the poll and being engaged throughout our time here today. We'll go ahead and end this just a couple minutes early and look to see you again on the next one.